Weirdly true horror stories about the encounter. I had this happen to me on a walk in Arizona in 2015. The trail went through a short stretch of sand and then an open, medium-sized mountain with a walkthrough that looked like a canyon at the top. I felt better when I went on 8 to 10 hour hikes by myself. It helped me forget about the stress of normal life. It didn't look like many people knew about the trail because there were no close parking spots, and the trailhead was very hard to find. It was hidden by a row of thick bushes, and the path was very weak and worn away. I never went out of my way to find trails with little or no traffic, but I also didn't like constantly running into other people on trails with a lot of traffic, so I wasn't worried about not knowing the path. The trees looked more and more dry until most of them looked like they were dead as I went down. A lot of them had fallen off the path, or had several thick branches break off. Not much had been done to the path in the last few years. As I went further down, the road turned into a maze of thick, overgrown bushes, but the path stood out enough for me to know I was still on the trail, so I kept going. I heard a noise coming from up the mountain though, and it was very clear. I could barely make out the whistling hold a few notes before it stopped. I have to say it was creepy and made me feel bad, but I thought someone else was on the trail. That was the only thing that made sense at the time. After 20 minutes, I hear the same gentle whistle again, but this time it is closer and stronger. But I wasn't going to leave the trail just because a guy was whistling close. This time, I was a little more scared. I kept my pocket knife with me as I went up another quarter mile, just in case. However, a tree had fallen right in the middle of the road. The thorny branches made it hard to get over, so I had to go around it. After taking a few steps to the right, I saw a small valley that looked like it used to be a river, but there was a small den made of big sticks right in the middle. I knew it had to be man-made because of how complicated it was. I started putting together the whistling and the room because I thought someone might be living here. Something about it made me feel bad, so I chose to leave right away. But that same whistle came from behind me, right as I turned to leave the valley. As I quickly turned to face the room, fear made my heart stop. I was shocked to see a goat standing right behind the valley, where I thought the whistle came from. As it stood there still, I felt like its eyes were looking right at me. It was also very big compared to other ones I had seen in the area. At this point, I was really freaking out inside, and couldn't even understand what was going on. After a short time, I was able to calm down and slowly walk away while still facing it. But when I took a step back, it opened its mouth a little, which wasn't normal. Then it made the same noise I had heard before. Because I was scared, I ran down the mountain and fell several times on rocks and trees. As I reached the end of the trail, I heard the whistle one more time, this time as a soft echo down the mountain. It was something I had never told anyone because I was afraid. They wouldn't believe me and would think I was a wimp. But until recently, I hadn't heard of skinwalkers. When I learned more about them, I realized that might be the only way to explain what I saw. Story 2. Every year, my family and some family friends would go camping in Wisconsin. My dad and his best friend Billy would take my sister, me, and all the other kids on what they called a snipe hunt. As long as you know what a snipe hunt is, you know that this is just a joke. It wasn't true that there are snipes. My dad and his friend were just making things up to get all the kids excited. They told us that snipes are very mean birds that hide in trees during the day and only come out at night. We ate this up because we were kids. My sister and I would get really excited every year when we thought we would finally see a snipe. It was the same this year. The second day of our trip was here, and all the families were settled in. Then, my dad and Billy set out on their task. All the kids were told that they were going to try to catch a snipe tonight. They said they heard one outside the RV last night. It was clear that anyone could come, as they told us. Now, all the kids were really excited and a little scared, but my sister and I were ready. All day we were excited and happy. When the sun started to go down, my dad gathered all the kids together. Some kids had sticks in their hands to protect themselves or fight, and one brought a wooden sword and used it. As we all went into the trees, my dad said that Billy had gone ahead to check out the area. We walk for 10 minutes before we hear the trees moving. When we all look up, Billy jumps out, red all over. screaming that a snipe got him. Everything went crazy with kids screaming and running. I, being 8 years old, thought it was real and ran too. I ran through the woods quickly until I found a tree with a big bush in it where I could hide. I didn't know which way I was going. I remember that I did my best not to cry or make a sound. After some time of not hearing anything, I peeked out from behind some trees and saw it. Something that looked like a dog, but had legs that were too long and too skinny. Its head looked messed up and deformed, and all I could see of its strange body were spots of hair. I had no idea what it was. I saw it slowly walk by, and even though I was far away, I could hear it whimpering. This thing captivated me. I really did not want to look at it, but I also could not turn away. It made me feel awful, and the longer I looked at it, the worse I felt. After all these years, that's the only way I can explain it. Because I was so young, I likely didn't fully understand what those thoughts were. I remember being in a dream or kind of a daze. My name was called out of the blue, and I heard the crunch of leaves and sticks far away. The thing I was looking at stopped in its tracks and gave me a hard stare. As we looked at each other, my dad grabbed my arm and picked me up. He told me it was just a joke and that he was sorry for making me run so far. There must have been a lot of feelings going through his mind, but all I could think about was this thing. It wasn't there when I turned around to see if it was still there. It ran away without me even noticing. I told my dad what I saw and why I thought it might have been a snipe as we walked back to the camp. The next year, I learned that snipes were not real because he said it couldn't have been. I'm not sure what I saw that night now that I think about it. Even though I kept telling myself it was just a big wolf for years, I knew it wasn't. I just didn't know why. I didn't know it was a skinwalker until I learned about them. To this day, I still don't understand. Anything could have happened. Who knows? I was very young at the time. However, I can still see it sometimes when I'm riding my bike or going for a walk in the woods. It's always there, watching me. Story 3. My wife, 2 kids, and I lived in a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Canada for almost 10 years. We all liked living in the bush because it was peaceful and quiet. Our cabin was out in the middle of nowhere, and there were no roads getting to it. A few miles away, though, there were some other families who lived in houses. We would often trade and meet up for dinner, so over time, thin, faint tracks formed between our cabins. We had a small farm where we grew veggies and raised different kinds of animals. Years went by with mostly good and quiet times in our lives. Then all of a sudden, things changed. I was up late one night reading in our living room, as I often did, when I heard the cows running around outside in a crazy way. This didn't happen very often this late at night, so I moved the curtains away from the window that faces our garden. Moving quickly, it looked like the cattle were running away from something. They were on the far left side of the field. When I looked to the right, it was still dark, so I couldn't see much. But after a while, I was able to make out a very large deer standing partly behind a tree and facing the house. Not moving at all, it was very still and just looked at me. Perhaps it was looking straight at me, but I didn't know for sure. It made me feel very nervous. Still, I didn't get why the cows would run away from a deer. Since it wasn't dangerous, I shut the curtain and read again. Like always, a few more weeks pass before my wife wakes me up in the middle of the night. What's going on? I was told to be quiet and pay attention. She looked like she'd been awake for a while because I could see fear in her eyes. I could hear something slowly moving around the house in the background. The sound went all the way around the cabin, like someone was pulling a stick along the walls. The sound stopped after going around the cabin once, though. To make sure my kids were okay, I got up right away and went to their room. Then I got my hunting gun and went to every window. Before I looked out my bedroom window, the last one I didn't see anything. But there it was, the same deer standing in the dark forest and looking at me without moving. Really, I had never seen an animal do that before, and I had no idea what those sounds were outside the house. Something dark came over me, and I shut the curtain. It was making me crazy because I didn't know what was going on. It was hard for me to understand because I didn't believe in ghosts or possessives. I chose to walk a long way to one of my neighbors' houses in the morning to ask them if they had seen or heard anything strange lately. Before I went down the road, I told my wife to keep the kids inside and make sure everything was locked. As I ran the first mile, I tried to think of any reason why what was happening could be happening. But the more I thought about it, the scarier I got. As I got halfway to my neighbor's house, I had a strange feeling. Almost right away, I heard the sound of leaves rustling behind me. It was looking right at me from the path, about 15 to 20 feet away. When I turned around, I saw its eyes. When I saw the white around its iris and small pupils, which is different from human eyes, I got chills all over my body. I went back around and ran all the way to my neighbor's house, almost crying because I had seen something that I didn't think was possible. Luckily, my friend was home and helped me feel better when I got there. The way he looked worried about me was different from what I thought it would be. When I told him what I saw, he didn't even look shocked. He began to tell me what he thought about the Navajo skinwalkers as I sat in his cabin. He said they would only come out if they needed something from you or if you were bothering them. It seemed to calm him down to talk about it, which made me even more scared. Soon after, I left, and luckily nothing bad happened on the way back. Over the next few weeks, I had terrible anxiety and couldn't sleep at all. But after a while of nothing else happening, I started to feel better. But the quiet life I used to have in the cabin was taken away, and I never fully got over being afraid of what I saw. We finally moved closer to town so that our kids could have a better life. I never told my wife or kids what I saw on the walk or what the neighbors told me. It's been almost 15 years since the events. Something inside me tells me to keep them out of it, and I'm not sure why. That's probably why I had to write this and share it now. I've been holding it in for too long. Horror stories on the night shift at work. In 2019, I worked for a year at a small diner in my town. It was just a normal restaurant, and I worked there as a server. Every night the store closed at 10, but my shift finished at 11 because I had to clean all the tables in the back room before going home. I closed the store by myself that night, and I just locked the doors at 10 p.m. I started to wipe down the tables, but right away there were several loud knocks on the front door. It made me jump, but when I turned around, I saw a man looking through the glass door. I told him in a loud voice that the business was closed for the night. The guy stayed there for a while, as if he didn't understand what I said. It hadn't been a big deal because it had happened before. I moved toward the door. Sorry, the store is closed for the day. Today is the last day to place an order. This time, I spoke louder to make sure he heard me. The guy looked at me for a second and didn't say anything. Then he smiled a little and turned around to walk away. After a few minutes, I forgot about it and went back to my work. I thought he might have been drunk or something. From the corner of my eye, I saw a figure move toward the front door and knock again. I stopped cleaning all the tables and began wiping down the front bar. The same person who was outside 15 minutes ago was looking at me through the door. That person had never done that before. So this time, I was more mad. In a way that looked like, "What are you doing?" I put both arms up. I looked at the man again as he knocked. In a very loud and firm voice, I told him we were closed and he had to leave. But this time, what I said seemed to bother him a lot. He tensed up and punched the door a few times, as if to see if it was locked. Then he turned and walked away. What the hell is wrong with that guy? I told myself this out loud as I walked toward the front windows to make sure he was going. I thought he was gone for good because I couldn't find him in the parking lot. I looked at the time and was a little annoyed that it was later than I had hoped. As I started to walk over to the bar, I heard a loud bang coming from the back door of the restaurant. I was frozen with fear because I wasn't sure if the back door was locked or not, but after a few seconds, they started hitting the door over and over again. Once I realized the door was locked, I knew I had to leave while I still could. Running out the front door, I quickly got to my car and called the cops. I could see the man come in through the restaurant window after a minute or two and start looking around the whole building. He then tried to open the cash register a few times, but I think gave up. He then left the store through the back door. When the cops got there, they made sure the man was gone and then asked me what happened. The back door had big holes in it, and the door handle was almost completely gone, like it had been hit with a hammer. Besides the tip jar we kept at the front desk, there wasn't much else that was broken or stolen. There are crazy people out there who were ready to do these things just to make a little extra money. If I had been in his way, I don't know what he would have done. Story 2. I worked as a watcher at a few different stores for most of my 20, doing nothing but putting things on shelves all day. But after a few years, I got a job at a chain pet shop where I had to work in more than one place. Every day I'd basically fill up a small van with boxes and drive to all the shops in the area to stock their shelves. When I was done, I'd return the van to the warehouse. But at this job, I had to pick up the van at 2:15 p.m. and wouldn't be able to leave until 12:10 a.m. on most nights. It would take much longer, and I would have to work an extra hour or two. The shift made it hard to live a normal life, but it wasn't a big deal for me because I was making a lot of money from the extra work. Anyway, I had been doing it for a while now, and this shift was the same as all the others. I wasn't going to get back to the warehouse until 1 a.m. because I was going to the last store at 11 p.m. As you can see, pet shops closed at 9, so I was the only one there. The back had a small dock where I could park my van. Then I could pull out my dolly and roll the boxes in. As always, I pulled up and opened the building's door. I brought in 3 big stacks of boxes and started moving each one to the area where it belonged. I looked up when I heard a small thud from the front of the shop and stood there still for a few seconds. When there were no more sounds, I went back to work. It did creep me out sometimes to work alone in the shops at night, but I was used to it by this point. You can hear sounds you don't like when the buildings are quiet, like the air conditioning going on and off, so I thought the noise was just another sound the building made. After I was done moving the boxes to the aisles, I opened them up and put the goods inside. It was about 45 minutes into the task when I heard the clear sound of one cough reverberating through the house. I stopped moving and stared at the front of the store again. I was so scared that I could feel my heart beating faster right away. No one was supposed to be here, and I was sure that if they weren't trying to do harm, they would have said something when I walked in. I quietly and slowly began to walk toward the back door after waiting for almost a minute. When I got outside, I locked the door and shut it. I felt a lot safer now. I got into my car and took out my phone to call 911. At that very moment, I heard frantic footsteps coming from inside the house and saw the door handle move a little. Even though I knew they wouldn't be able to open the door because it was key-locked, it was still scary and got my heart racing. Then there was loud, hard banging and maybe even kicking on the other side of the door. The man yelled at me and begged me to let him out. His voice was filled with anger and rage. I didn't answer and quickly called the cops. The man was yelling and swearing while I was on the phone. He kept hitting the door and trying to open it in a rough way. After hearing that the cops were coming, I turned on the van and moved farther away from the door. Part of me wanted to make sure that this guy didn't get away before the police came, even though I knew it would have been safer to drive away. Thank goodness they got here quickly. It was quiet at the door when I met them there and gave them the key. After going inside for a few minutes, the 3 police officers came out with a guy in handcuffs. He was only carrying a big knife when he was found. That's the most strange thing about this whole thing, and it's what I think about the most. The man hid with a knife in a store and didn't take anything. That's the only reason I can think of for the man's desire to hurt me, even though I had never seen him before. I feel scared to think that I was only a few feet away from something terrible, but at least I don't have to worry about what he really meant. Story 3. Oh, I worked overnight as a drive-thru worker at a fast food place for almost 3 years. Since I only took part-time classes in college and had odd class times, working overnight made it much easier for me to do my homework during the day. During most of my shifts, nothing much would happen, and time would pass slowly. But strange things would happen from time to time. My boss always tried to make sure that 2 people were planned to stay the night, but sometimes we had to be on our own. Lucky for me, most of the weird things that happened at work happened with my coworker there. But this time, I wasn't so lucky. My main coworker who worked overnights with me was on vacation that week, so I did 3 of the 5 night shifts by myself that week. The first 2 nights were fine, just like any other. It took a long time, and everyone who used the drive-thru ordered small, easy things. Even on the 3rd night, things got off to a slow start. 5 to 10 people came in every hour to order a small snack or a drink. Then, around 2 a.m., there was a long break during which no one showed up for nearly 45 minutes. I left my headset on in case someone came through the drive-thru, but I chose to clean since I had some extra time. While I was waiting, I cleaned because I didn't have anything else to do. While I was cleaning, I never had to worry about being stopped. At one point, I walked by the front desk and saw bright headlights shining through the store's front window. The car was parked right outside the doors. The dining room at our restaurant ended at 9 p.m. every night, and only the drive-thru was open, so it seemed a little odd that someone was parking there. I didn't think much of it though, because they could have just parked and used their iPhone to get instructions, which is why I kept cleaning. After a few minutes though, my radio beeped to let me know that there was a customer in the drive-thru. I quickly went to the window and asked what I could do to help. A man asked for a big soda in a soft voice. As usual, I told him to move forward and poured his fountain drink. But the guy pulled up really quickly, so I was still making the drink. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that he was looking at the restaurant through the window. This was done by some, but I never got why because it's really weird. But I was done and gave him the drink. I thanked him and told him to have a good night. I cleaned a few tables and put things back in order on a small shelf while I took a break. I jumped back a little as I walked by the window though, because the man was still there looking at me. "Did you need something else, sir?" He didn't answer for a moment, not even to my question, until he finally said no and drove off. It was really creepy and strange that the guy just sat there and looked out the window for 5 minutes while I cleaned. I knew the restaurant doors were locked though, so I felt mostly safe. I put my headset back on and went to clean the front counters. That sound stops for a few minutes before it starts to beep again. There was no answer when I asked them what they wanted at the computer. I asked again, but still didn't hear back. I turned around and watched the live feed from the cams behind me at the drive-thru line. The car somehow drove past the counter where you could order food and stopped a few feet behind the window where I was standing. I got a better look and saw that the man in the car was the same one from earlier. I moved away from the window and stood around the corner because I was getting really scared at this point. When I stood in that way, the window couldn't see me, but I could still see what the camera was seeing. The video was too hazy to tell what the man in the car was doing, but I could see him moving. After a minute, he quickly pulls up and starts banging on the window really hard. After a short time, he speeds out of the drive-thru lane and parks right in front of the front door. This scared me. The driver door swings open and a man gets out of the car. He quickly walks up to the front door with something in his hand. I grabbed the shop phone right away and called 911. The man shook the door handles violently as he tried to open the locked doors. Thankfully, he gave up after a few tries and ran back to his car, driving off. When the police came, they checked to see if I was okay and asked me what had happened. I heard that they came back in the morning to talk to my boss and get the camera video so they could get a license plate. I didn't hear anything else about it after that though, so I'm not sure if he was caught. There's no way to know for sure, but I've always thought the man was trying to rob someone. But I was alone that night, so it was easy for someone to hurt me. Bad things could have happened, and no one would have been there to stop them. Horror stories in creepy hotels. In my late 20s, I worked as a security guard at a big hotel in Las Vegas. The scheduling and staff were the worst things about the job, even though it paid a lot more than any other local job I was qualified for. At the time, the building was having trouble with not having enough people to cover shifts, so I would work in the mornings, evenings, or overnights at odd times during the week. Sometimes it was so hard to sleep, but I liked the money. That being said, I worked a late shift tonight and was talking to 2 coworkers at the front desk. At about 11 o'clock, my shift was over, so we were just slaying time. The phone went off on the desk I was leaning on in the middle of our talk. I picked up the phone and asked how I could help them, after seeing that it was from a hotel room. Someone spoke up and said that he was very worried about what was going on in one of the rooms down the hall. When I asked him what he meant, he snapped back that he was getting really nervous and told me to hurry up. I called the room number and told him I would send security up right away. Of course, I only meant to talk about myself. When I hung up the phone, I quickly told my coworkers about the strange nature of the call. I then took the lifts to the middle floor, where the caller's room was. There was a strange feeling of complete silence as I walked down the hall. I thought I would be able to hear what the person was saying, but there were no loud noises coming from the floor. Another thing I thought was that the caller might have been waiting for me by their door, but it was locked. I rang the doorbell loudly to let them know it was hotel security. I didn't hear any sounds or movement coming from the room. When I knocked on the door again after a minute and still got no answer, I walked down to the end of the hallway and listened carefully for anything strange. But after a short time, the door to the room next to me opened, and an older woman asked if I was security. I said yes and asked if they knew anything about the weird noise or the caller from the room. They said they had heard loud noises coming from the hallway a few minutes ago, but weren't sure what they were. The way they spoke and looked made it look like they were really scared. I was already getting very scared at this point, but things kept getting weirder. I got my walkie-talkie and radioed the front desk to ask them to call the room again and let me know if they got through. After a while, they said that no one had answered. For a moment, I stood there and tried to decide what to do before sending a radio message back to them. I told them to see who was the guest in the room. They finally got back to me after what seemed like forever, telling me that no one had booked the room for tonight. To make things even stranger, I opened the door with my security key card, even though no one should have been there. From what I could tell, the room was clean and not being used. Nearly everywhere I looked, I couldn't find anything. Then I went to the phone. I turned it over and got the serial number. Then I went back to my desk in the hallway and looked through the security records for phone calls that had come from that room. It was true. There was a record of a call going from this room to the front desk. It was the call I had answered about 15 minutes ago. The hotel didn't record the calls or anything, so all I knew for sure was that someone was in that empty room without permission. The next morning, a family member staying in a different room reported that one of the guests staying in a room on the same floor was missing. This led to a bigger investigation over the next few days. All of the entrance and exit security video was looked at, and the missing person was last seen leaving the hotel by themselves a few hours before I got the call. It's still not clear if the two events were linked or not, but it's clear that something is very strange going on. The caller may not have known how to get into that phone or who they were, but based on what they said, I think the reason they called was related to someone being grabbed by force. No one ever did figure out who made the strange call, and the person who went missing has still not been found. Story 2. This happened to me on a work trip last year. When I got to the hotel, I picked up the key to my room, which my company had paid for. When we went inside, the hotel looked nice, but it was a bit smaller than most. There were only 3 stories and about 30 to 40 rooms. Since my room was on the top floor, I took the lift up and began walking down the hall. My bags were sitting by the door, and I reached into my pocket for the room key. Just then, the door to the room next door opened, and a man walked into the hall. He said hello and said he was my neighbor. He then held out his hand for a handshake. I shook it in a strange way, told him my name, and then went into the room. When I walked in, I saw that he had also gone back to his room and closed the door. Some people are just that way, I guess. I thought it was weird that someone would come out of their temporary hotel room just to say hello to me as their temporary roommate. After taking my small suitcase and tote bag out of the closet, I laid down on the bed and turned on the TV. I was tired from the trip and it was getting late, so I planned to go to bed early that night. After a quick shower, I turned off all the lights. I tried to fall asleep for almost 20 minutes until I heard my neighbor's door creak open and saw their shadow walk by my door. But they stopped right before they got to my room. I could see their shadow move closer for a second through the tiny bit of light under the door. Then it moved back and continued down the hall. It was clear that this scared me, so I got up and made sure the door locks were all in place. I then went back to sleep. The next day, I met up with my coworkers at a building owned by the company. We went to a lecture and then had dinner. It was 10 p.m. when I got back to the hotel, and I was really tired. I put my work bag on the bed and then went to the shower. There was a clear beep sound coming from the automatic door lock when it opened. I had been in there for about 10 minutes. I knew it was too late for the cleaning service, so the strange man staying in the room next to mine came to mind right away. I didn't understand how he could have a key card that could open my door, though. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there and listened to the door slowly open and close. Then I heard footsteps walk past the bathroom door while the shower was running. They had to know I was in there, which made me feel even more scared. I got out of the shower slowly so as not to wake them up. Then I put on a pair of pants that were lying on the ground and made sure the zipper was locked. I leaned my ear against the door to the bathroom and went to sleep. There was a weak sound that made me think someone was going through one of my bags. Yes, I did want to talk to them, but I didn't know if they had a gun or a knife. At that time, I felt like I couldn't do anything and was frozen with fear. The room went quiet quickly, and I had no idea what this guy wanted from me. I didn't have my phone with me, but I thought calling for help would be the best thing to do. We hoped that it would at least make the guy run away. Taking a deep breath, I screamed for help as loud as I could through the bathroom door. The man was running so fast that I could hear his steps go past the door and back into the hallway. I quickly left the house and locked the front door. I then ran to the nightstand to get my phone and, with shaking hands, called 911. I called the front desk to let them know as well, once they were on their way. But the man was already gone by the time they got here. Luckily, the cops found him in his car a few hours later. He might have gone to jail for what he did, but I'm not sure because they couldn't show that he meant to hurt anyone. But I really believe he was trying to take me because he went into the room knowing I was there. I guess we'll never know for sure what would have happened. Story 3. Every summer, my family would take a trip to a different hotel and getaway. My wife, 2 boys, and I would always be there. We would spend most of our time at the lodge and not go anywhere else. We saved money because we didn't have to rent a car, and it was nice to get away from regular life and stay somewhere nice. As soon as we got there in the morning, we unpacked and the kids were ready to go to the water park right away. My wife and I sat in chairs by the pool while our boys played with other kids at the water park next to the pool. There we were in the sun for about 2 hours before we both decided it was time to go back to our rooms and get ready for dinner. I got up and started looking for the boys all over the water park. After a while, I found Sam, the older of the 2, and asked him where Alan was. For their own safety, I changed both of their names. From across the park, Sam told me that Alan was having fun with another child. I told Sam that we were going and that he should go get his mom while I looked for Alan. I looked for him and walked around like a fool for about 10 minutes. I was getting worried when I finally saw him. He was talking to a little boy who looked about his age while sitting in the back corner among some chairs. 2 people who looked like the boy's parents were sitting next to him. When I walked up to them and quickly introduced myself, they didn't say anything back except smile a little. There were a few awkward seconds of quiet. After that, I told Alan we were going to dinner and took him back to the hotel. I asked him about his new friend, and he said that he played with him at the water park. At first, it wasn't strange because Alan was a chatty kid, but then he told me something strange. He said the boy put him in touch with the boy's parents, who then asked him to come to dinner tonight. It seemed very odd for someone to ask a young boy to dinner without first talking to the boy's parents. My wife and I told each other as soon as we got to the room. She was also very worried. We quickly went somewhere for dinner and got back to the hotel around 5. We were ready to take it easy for the rest of the night because both of the kids looked pretty tired. We took the elevator to our floor, but Alan's new friend and his mother were already there when the doors opened, as if they were waiting for the elevator to go down. The mother gave me a quick smile as soon as we got out and asked Alan if he could come to dinner with them tonight. I took a quick look at my wife, who looked just as confused and worried as I did. Then I turned my attention back to the woman. She smiled as she walked down the hallway across from them, I think to their room. "We already had dinner tonight, but maybe we can work something out for tomorrow." What did I know? My wife and I both thought the same thing, that they were waiting for us by the elevator the whole time to ask about dinner. We told Alan he couldn't go near that family without one of us with him as soon as we got to our room. He seemed a little mad about it, but he agreed. I took Sam away and told him what was going on. I also told him that I wanted him to watch his little brother if we weren't around. Then, we all took turns taking showers. After that, we hung out on the bed and couch for the rest of the night. Already being stressed out about my child's safety during vacation was making me mad. But I told myself that things would get better tomorrow. We all got ready for bed and turned off the lights in the end. There were 2 beds in the room. My wife and I slept on one, and the boys shared the other. A few hours into the night, something woke me up. I jumped up because I think I was very tense. Sam was still shaking my arm next to me, Sam asked me in a whisper, "Are you okay, buddy?" Alan was talking to someone at the door. I jumped out of bed right away and turned the corner that led to the front door. I could tell he was trying to figure out how to open the door from the brief look I caught of him before I yelled at him. I could also hear a weak voice on the other side. I ran after him and yelled at him to move away from the door. Alan jumped back because of how loud my voice was. As I slammed my head against the door and swung it open, I heard quickly moving feet coming down the hall. I should have stayed in the room and called for help, but I was so mad that all I wanted to do was fight the creep. I quickly saw a man's shape turn the corner and walk down the hall toward the elevators. I tried to catch up, but he wasn't there when I turned the corner. I knew he was staying on that floor because he wouldn't have had time to take the lift. I looked around for a while and then ran back to our room to find my wife, who was already awake from all the noise. I told her to lock the door because I was going to the front desk to let them know what happened. I had to slow down before I could talk about what had happened. By the time I got to the lobby, my adrenaline was starting to wear off. A young woman at the bar and I talked. It was clear that she had never been through something like this before. She got a security guard and her boss to come talk to me. They talked about it for a while, but it became clear that they couldn't do much anyway. There were no security cameras in the halls, only at the doors and windows. I didn't know anything about the man at the door or how he was related to the parents who asked about dinner. I obviously thought it was the other boy's dad, but I couldn't really prove it, even though I was sure I knew what the creepy parents were up to. They could only give us a refund for the days we still had left, so we had to move to a different location 30 minutes away. There is nothing that can be done to make it better for parents who know that someone was trying to take their child, even though it seems very doubtful. It makes me sick to think that those creepy parents are probably out there right now trying to trick kids into some weird trap they have set. Those people should spend the rest of their lives in jail. By telling other parents about this, I hope that they will be able to protect their children from these horrible people. What scares me the most is the thought that the boy who was with them might have been someone else's lost child, who they are now using to get other kids to join them. Amazingly scary stories of driving on a rainy night. As a foreign man, I drove for Uber and Lyft for a few years while I was in college. It wasn't a problem for me to drive people around because I had a pretty new car that got great gas mileage. I always saw it as an easy way to make money. While I've never been the talkative type, I do tend to just say hello when they come in instead of making weird small talk. Most of my customers are college students who need to get back to their dorms or to a party at someone else's house. However, because of school, I would mostly work from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. every day. This evening, I started driving around 10 to 15 people at 8 p.m. and picked up a guy around 11 p.m. It showed on the app that he would be picked up on the side of a small neighborhood road. It wasn't that strange, but when I got to where he was, I couldn't find him. While it was dark, the roads were not very well lit. While I looked around, I pulled over to the side and put the car in park. I could only see a gate ahead of me that blocked normal traffic from getting into the neighborhood, so I couldn't go any further. Anyway, I didn't know what else to do, so I called the guy. After a couple of rings, he turned it down, but almost right away, the back door opens and a man walks in. I had no idea where he could have come from, but I think I must have missed him in some way. "Hey, are you Tom?" I made sure it was my customer by asking. His answer was a quiet, "Yeah." To get out of the neighborhood, I put the car in drive and made a 3-point turn. While driving at night, I'm not the most careful Uber driver, but I do pay close attention to make sure I don't get into a bad situation. Sometimes I'll look in the mirror to see what they're doing. As I did this, I thought the man seemed off. He looked like a normal 30-year-old man, but the way he was moving his hands and looking at the floor made him seem tense. That was really strange, and it made me feel bad. He wanted to take a 15-minute drive to a house near my college. Things began to get a lot stranger around the middle. Again, he asked, "How close are we?" in a voice that shook a little, like he was scared. "We'd be there in 8 minutes, I told him. After a brief moment of quiet, he leaned forward, in some ways between the front seats. "Is everything okay, sir?" After that, he leaned back in his chair, but didn't say anything. When we looked at each other in the rearview mirror, he looked away and started moving around again. I was pretty sure something wasn't right, so I used this time to check him out in the mirror for weapons. I wasn't sure if he had a knife or not because there were no signs of something big like a gun. I tried to stay cool, but all the bad things that might happen to me kept going through my mind. Within 4 minutes, the man asked me again if I could just pull over and drop him off. Even though it was quiet on the road and there were no cars close, I didn't feel safe at all. Are you sure your stop is just a couple of minutes away? He said no, but I told him I had to keep driving to get to a safer place. No, deliver me here. This is where I need to get off. I slowly moved the car to the sidewalk. The car stopped, but I kept it in drive by putting my foot on the brake. I told him nicely to go to sleep and hoped he'd leave. Nevertheless, he did stay. There were a few strange seconds of silence during which neither of us spoke or moved. The man then jerked forward and reached for my phone. When I slammed into him, he dropped the phone in the space between the seats. As he hurriedly reached around the front seat for anything he could find, we kept fighting. Because I couldn't keep my foot on the brake, the car kept jolting forward. But after about 20 seconds of trying and failing many times, the man leaned back, got out of my car, and ran off the road. I got in my car and drove away from the scene of the crime while calling 911. While I tried to explain what had happened, I was shaking and breathing hard. The good news is that they seemed to get it. Basically, the guy was using a friend's Uber account, and he was caught pretty fast. The guy didn't even bring a gun, so I feel really lucky to have gotten out of there without getting hurt. From what I know, he hadn't been violent before, which might explain why he was scared and unprepared. His actions almost made it look like he didn't want to do it. Although I still drive for Uber and Lyft, I no longer work really late shifts, and I'm much more careful about who I pick up. Story 2. I work for a big company that helps families move across the country as a mover and a truck driver. Usually a group of movers and I will go to a house where everything is already packed up in boxes. We will then load those boxes onto our semi-truck, along with their furniture. Later, I drive the truck to the new house and unload it with a smaller group of local movers that the company hired. But driving is the most important part of my job, since we do a lot of cross-country moving. When that happened, I had been working at this job for 4 years and driving trucks for more than 10 years. That kind of thing had happened to other people, but I never thought it would happen to me. Up to Upper Michigan was where they moved from Lower Tennessee. Even though it wasn't my longest drive, it was still a full-day trip. We were done loading up by noon, and I started the drive at 2 p.m. For the first few hours, everything was fine. I didn't stop for about 6 hours before I finally pulled over to get some food. For another hour, I kept going. Lower to Middle Illinois is mostly farmland at this point. The highway gets narrower until it's just a long, one-lane road with farms or forests on either side. One small light emerged far ahead of me as I drove through the dark with only my headlights shining on the road. It became clearer that it was a car's blinking warning lights as I got closer. The front and back headlights were blinking though, which told me the car was parked on the road sideways. Because I knew I'd have to carefully get around them to get into the opposite lane, I slowed down. But after about 100 feet, I could see another car in my headlights. The front of it was stopped so close to the back of another that it wasn't visible from far away. All of its lights were off. Both sides of the road were stopped by the two cars. About 20 feet away, I stopped my truck and left it running while I looked at what was going on. Were they in an accident? At first, I thought so, but I couldn't see any damage on either car, and they both looked like they were parked almost perfectly. Naturally, the thought of an attack from behind made me worried, so I pulled out my small pistol that I kept hidden in the center console. You're right, it did make me feel better, but I had never had to use it before, and if someone was planning an attack, they were probably armed too. But what really stumped me was that one of the cars had its warning lights on. Plus, I didn't see how that could possibly reveal that there was a problem. There was no one there. I stayed in the truck and looked all over the scene and the side of the road for signs of someone being there. Turning the truck around wasn't possible. And even if it were, the closest alternative would take hours and take miles away. There was no way to do it. I nervously turned my head around for about 5 minutes, waiting for someone to come out at any moment. But since I hadn't heard or seen any noises or movement, I went to check on the cars. But I was so scared that I even took my gun's safety off before leaving the truck. I waited by the open door for a minute after getting out, hoping I could jump back inside if someone chose to jump me early. As I got closer to the small car with the hazards on, I moved more slowly. There was nothing strange about the way the headlights from my truck shone through the hole in the car. It was very clean on the inside. The door key was unlocked when I checked it. I thought it was weird that someone would leave their car open in the middle of the road like this, and I saw that the car was in neutral when I got inside. Looking behind the car, all I could see was a flat field of grass. Another look around the area later, I got in front of the car and started pushing it. It started moving in just a few seconds, and it was pretty easy for it to keep going down. There was still some room between the two cars for my truck to fit through, but the front of the car was still on the road. I heard a loud voice yell from far away as I started to walk back to my truck. As I turned around, I saw a person running down the road toward me. Right away, I ran to the truck and got inside. Two more guys running next to him with something in their hands could now be seen in the headlights. They were already close to the two cars when I got the truck moving, and they were still running toward me, set it up so it would go between the cars, and as I drove by them, I ducked my head a little in case they started shooting. Thank goodness I got away without getting hurt, and there were no signs that they were following me. I tried to call the cops right away, but couldn't until I got closer to a small town 30 minutes later. That's what I told them. I wasn't sure if they needed help or if it was a trap, but it made me feel very uneasy. It's possible that I just pushed someone's car off the road who was trying to get help, but everything seemed too perfect for that to be the case. Just don't get why they were all up the road if they were getting ready to attack. No matter the reason, it could have kept me from something terrible. Story 3. I watched two wonderful kids for a single mom who runs a pretty successful small business and can't be with her kids as much as she would like to. Friday night, the kids had a play that their mom couldn't make it to, so I went in her place. At 7, the play was over, and we had to rush home to get the kids fed and to bed by 8:30. For their sports training, they usually had to get up early. Since it was fall, the sun went down pretty early. By the time the play was over, it was almost completely dark outside. After I got them comfortable in the back seat, we left for home. The family lived a long way from the school, in a nice area where you can walk to your neighbors but aren't too close to anyone else. On most of the drive, the road winds around and doesn't have many lighting. There are no steps, and the road is actually pretty small for two cars. Lucky for me, not many people use this road because there are only 4 or 5 homes in this neighborhood. That's why I thought it was strange when a car started following me very closely. I thought it might be an older person in the area who has trouble seeing, so I didn't pay attention to it until they turned on their brights. The road had a 15 mph speed limit, so I stopped so they could go around me. It was so dark out that I didn't want to speed up on this road. That being said, they pulled over at the same time I did. Even though I was scared, I tried to tell myself that if they were going this way, they probably lived here. The stoplight might not have been working. While I was looking back, a man got out of his car and waved. To be safe, I locked the doors and rolled down my window a bit. With a smile, he walked up to the car and asked me if a certain location was across the street. The address didn't sound right, so I said no. I did notice that he kept looking at the kids in the back while he asked the question. Obviously, this made me feel awful. I told him that I had to say sorry when I got home. He looked down on it. "Those are some cute kids you have backing there. Do you know what their names are?" That was really annoying. I said goodbye and began slowly letting out the gas. He tried to grab the door just as I started to move forward. He then punched the trunk and yelled at me as I drove away. The kids began to feel scared, and I did my best to stay relaxed. I called the cops and told them what happened. As I talked, I noticed headlights behind me. He began honking his horn loudly. The person answering the phone told me to hold on while they sent cops. He was dangerously following me, and I was sure that he would hit me if I even touched the brakes. The first house on the street was almost in sight, and I prayed with all my heart that the people who lived there were home. I wasn't going to directly show this person where the kids lived. I started honking nonstop as we got closer to the house. Our follower had slowed down and stopped. I felt relieved when I saw an older woman looking out her window as I pulled into the driveway of the house. When the woman and her husband came out, I told them what was going on. Not long after that, I heard police sirens far away. After taking my report, they walked me and the kids back to the house. It was about an hour later when their mother showed up. She asked me what he looked like after I told her everything. I told her as much as I could about the man, but she just stood there still. Eventually she said, "Found me." The person answered, "My ex-husband." It seems that she got a protection order years ago because her ex-husband tried to take her kids more than once. This must have happened before then. The police were able to quickly find him though, so I never had to see him again.